Welcome to More Able Than Dis, the podcast where we discuss everything related to disability and music education. More Able Than Dis is sponsored by the Music Department at Georgia College and State University, Georgia's designated public liberal arts university. Today we'll be talking with our special guest, Dr. Deborah Amond, about her music adaptation plans. Deborah Amond serves as an assistant professor of special education at Northern Kentucky University. She began her career as a music teacher, teaching inclusive music classes and running an inclusive piano studio for 20 years before making the shift to special education. After serving the disability community in the P12 continuum, Dr. Amond moved into teacher preparation and educational studies at North Kentucky University. Back in 2012, she co-founded the Adaptive Music Project, now expanded into the Adaptive Arts and Music Project, focusing on collecting best practices in adaptive music education, primarily through the Cincinnati Adaptive Music Camp, where students participate in the process of creating music adaptation plans. These plans guide teachers in the development of adaptive principles for advancing a student with physical disabilities in the study of their musical instrument. Though CAMC was placed on a hiatus for several years, Dr. Amond has continued to teach private adaptive piano lessons and consults with music teachers around the world. Cincinnati Adaptive Music and Arts Camp will be reopening in July 2026. All right. Hi, Dr. Amond. So we're going to talk about your MAPS program, and you developed the MAPS, yes? You with Dr. Petrie?
Yes. Maps were actually something I had started. So back when Jennifer and I started adapting playing for our children, we got together and realized through a conversation that we both were using kind of similar principles to, even though we were doing different instruments and different disabilities, we were using similar principles for how we were approaching what we were doing. And I was an intervention specialist, special education teacher at the time, so I was familiar with IEPs. And I thought, really something to kind of outline what we're doing would be a good idea. And so I took those ideas and created what ended up being the first MAP template. And we decided to use those when we were hosting CAMC to just guide the teachers in how they were doing the adaptations, but also to use it as a source for collecting data on what exactly they were doing. And so we did that for the 4 or 5 years that we ran camp and collected those. And then I continued to do that when I was teaching privately, or somebody would contact me for something, to troubleshoot. I continued to collect them after that. And then I went back after that and I did several rounds of coding on all of those maps and created themes with that. And then I turned that into what was the finalized version of a map, which is much more detailed and directed than the
Are there
original
any,
ones.
when you were doing your coding, did you notice any themes that might be useful for our classroom teachers?
So, yeah, well, there were themes that cropped up because there are a few things. First of all, what showed up universally is that there are some universal areas that you're always going to look at. Like, you're not going to answer those questions the same. So you're not going to answer the questions the same, but you're going to look at each of those areas. So, like, when you're looking to adapt an instrument, one of the things you want to know and understand is uh, what is the range of motion that student has with however they're going to connect. So really, the first thing you want to look at is that range of motion. How are they going to connect to the instrument? And then beyond that, then you have to think about how their instrument is positioned, and then what devices do you need to position that. So it's kind of like a sequence series, I think, that emerged from the maps.
Very cool. Yeah, that's good information to know because when I talk to my public school teachers, you know, and this goes back to what Deb said, the first thing you have to do this is believe that there is a way to do this.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but just, that handle is the hardest thing. Once we get a handle, then sometimes last year at the Georgia Music Educators Association conference, I did like short little spotlights from different people who were in attendance. And we had a few people who had adapted trombone, just simply by flipping the instrument over so we could play it with the other arm or.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
once you have a handle on the situation and it sounds like that handle might be with range of motion primarily.
So yeah, I think it's range of motion. Really, the very first thing. So when what we found, what we were doing is when the student comes in looking at what they're capable of doing. So you look at their range of motion. You look at, are there missing or residual limbs? So you look at what's missing, but what's still there,
Sure.
right? So okay, you might look at them and say they're missing a right hand, or you could look at them and say, well, they have a residual limb, what's left on their right side, that kind of thing. You assess what's there, and you also want to look at like strength. Are there differences in their finger strengths? Are there differences in their overall strength?
Sure.
So you've got all of those kind of combinations, range of motion, what limbs are impacted, and what's there that you can work with, and then what's the strength level with their individual fingers or their arms or whatever. But really, the first thing after you get that basic information is, how are they going to connect to the instrument?
Sure.
And really, what part of their body is going to be used to play that instrument? And you can figure that out by figuring out those other things. So if well, they have a better range of motion on their right, maybe we'll flip the instrument. Or they have nothing on their right, so we're going to flip the instrument because they're going to use it on their left.
Sure.
So figuring out how they're going to connect to the instrument is the first thing that you're going to do. And then after that, we figured out that the next thing is, then you can figure out the positioning. So if they're going to use, I taught piano one time to a little girl who used one foot and one finger, you know, because of the way her body was. She had PFFD in her left leg, which made her leg very short. And so her foot was right there. And then she had one finger on the other hand. Once you figure that out, then you got to figure out, how is she going to sit at that piano
Oh, that's not.
where she can accent.
I was
So,
ask, did she
so
have crazy core strength or did we sit her up high?
we sat her up high. She did have crazy core strength too, but yeah, yeah. So you change how they sit at the instrument, the position. In some cases, you're going to change the position of the instrument. I mean, you can't with the piano, really. You can, because you can do a keyboard and put it on the floor, right? But if you're talking about a full size piano, but that's another thing you can decide. If they have poor finger strength, then maybe a keyboard is better
Sure.
because it doesn't take as much effort to push the keys, right? So, but once you establish how they're going to connect, then you can look at, how are we changing the position of the instrument? How are we changing the position of how they sit? Um, and then once you've determined that, then you can determine, do we need a stand? And what do we need that stand to do? So there's kind of like a sequence that just kind of emerged. And the thing that I think has been interesting in all this, when I've done any kind of literature research or anything, people have always adapted playing. Like, you can find it throughout history, but it's always in this kind of ad hoc way. Like, I had an injury and
Yeah.
I need to do this, or I've been presented with a student, oftentimes who's lost the ability and they want to still play. There's been nothing systematic, like where somebody has been able to take a body of, this is what's happened, a body of data, and figure out, is there a process that we could create. And the thing we found with these maps is that does exist. It's just that the answers aren't always the same.
Ah,
right? So
very
you may
different.
consider something like going back to the piano again, you're going to change the position of where the person sits, but in another instrument with another instrument, you might change the position of the instrument,
Sure.
right? So it just really depends. But those
With
core universal things can kind of guide you in those decisions.
with the pianist who played with a foot and a hand, you couldn't raise a traditional bench that high, could you?
No, she sat. So what we had was the traditional bench, and then she had a booster seat
Okay.
in the traditional bench. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking that might be a time for a different like seating mechanism.
Yeah, and sometimes, and that goes down with the map as well. We address like, do they need specialized seating? Because a lot of times they do.
Mm,
Uh, if you've changed the position
sure.
of how they're playing the instrument.
I
Yeah.
have a friend who is an amputee. She has, I can't remember which leg is amputated, and over the course of trying to fit her with her prosthetic and everything, it ends up being pretty much up to the knee. But,
Mm-hmm.
but she's a clarinetist, and what surprised us all in this process was losing that limb affected how she sat to play the clarinet because it threw her
Right.
yeah, it threw her balance off because she was lighter on one side than she was used to be. So even a limb that shouldn't affect her instrument did.
It really does. The very first piano student I ever had, just incidentally, was somebody with spina bifida. And I always look back on that and think that's so funny because I was a teenager and I really wanted to have piano students. And these men showed up at our house to paint my parents' living room, and I was practicing. And one of the painters was like, do you teach piano? And I was like, yes. And
Yeah.
it turned out his daughter had spina bifida, and I thought, I was kind of like already saying I would teach, but then I was like, how does this impact? And she came in, and it does. It didn't much. We had to figure out how to get her balanced, and then it was fine after that. But I realized even that difference, which you would think would not impact,
Yes.
it does. Yeah. And so it's interesting. Our
Makes
bodies are a system.
Yes, yes. And I like these, you're giving me so many ideas for, people who have, I even have another friend, a former student actually, who there was a school shooting at his school either last year or the year before, but one of his instrumentalists was shot and is now trying to come back to play, but we're trying to figure out how to play. And probably by now we figured it out.
Yeah.
But we're trying to figure out how to make those changes for this young person who sustained that injury.
Yeah.
But and like you said, we tend to with disability kind of things, we do very bespoke ideas. We need this solution for this person.
Yeah.
But kind of, I think what I've seen with Omi, we're trying, and what I don't know if you know, I've applied to do a Fulbright to actually, we talked about having a foundational literature to
Mm-hmm.
put our adaptive musicians from here to the literature we're trying to get them to.
Mm-hmm.
So I've actually written a Fulbright proposal to go to Manchester next spring and do some primer building.
Oh, exciting.
But I think that at the last conference we did, among other things, we've been talking a lot about, kind of formalizing this so that students with disabilities have options already. I think that's what ABRSM is doing with their testing and
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the thing is, I don't think there's going to be like universal solutions, but there can be a universal process that
and yeah,
guides people. And, um, and
and your
even as
map to do that.
Yes, it's a good place to start, at least. There may be better ways that can develop too, but it's a good way to start. And what I found since then is like we get into then how do we replicate this? Because
Yeah.
we have a lot of resources in Cincinnati. We always partnered with, and we still do partner with May We Help, which is an engineering charity, and they invent and build devices for free for people with physical disabilities that are unique devices.
Uh,
So we have access to this, but if we want to replicate this, where are people going to fill that void? Because there are needs. Um, there tends to be. some kind of device needed at some point to support the instrument. Because even if you're looking, my oldest daughter played piano for a while, and she has only one arm completely. She has no arm on her left, on her right. I'm sorry, and then she has two different length legs, and she uses a prosthetic, so she can't pedal. She couldn't position herself to pedal, so we ended up with a device that actually came out from the piano, and it had to come out from under, and then it had to go out and then up and then over, and then she could pedal with her shoulder, right?
Okay.
You know,
Very cool.
and so then she could hit it with that shoulder and she could pedal. As one-handed pianists know, pedal is very important
It
when
is, yes.
in those circumstances. And but even that required a device of some kind. And so I've really started to look. The maker movement provides a lot of opportunities for
All
that,
right.
and there's so many of them, and so many maker spaces in libraries and things like that. That I'm thinking those are the places we're probably going to end up a lot of times sending people. Um,
Oh, wow.
People talk about prosthetists, which is great, but you have to get the funding somehow. And everything is so expensive. So some of these bigger places um, might be able to take that on, but like your independent
They
prosthetic
won't, yeah.
provider, it doesn't have the resources to do that a lot of times.
Season 2 of More Able Than Dis is sponsored by the Music Department at Georgia College and State University. In addition to bachelor's degrees in music and music therapy, including a BA plus MAT path to initial music teacher certification, GC&SU offers an online master's degree in music education for certified teachers seeking to improve or expand their knowledge and skills, as well as a hybrid Master of Arts in Teaching degree for those seeking initial music teacher certification in Georgia. We accept certified and licensed teachers from across the U.S., and GA certification is reciprocal with most other states, so don't let state boundaries deter you from applying. Apply now to start in spring or summer 2026. Contact tina.holmes-davis at gcsu.edu for more information about the graduate music education degrees at GC&SU.
The other thing, that I'm thinking that the maker movement, is that basically sending somebody plans to a 3D printer and they print out what you sent them the plans for?
Yeah.
P- Peter Worrell, the clarinet maker, the maker of my clarinet, um, was planning to do that with his one-handed recorders. But what the problem he was facing was, even after you printed the component pieces, you have to have somebody with enough technical know-how to actually put them together.
Yes. Yeah.
And so do you find that most of the things that we are looking for so far that we've identified through your maps process are things that would be readily
So it's
assembled?
interesting. Woodwinds are hard, right?
They are.
I think they're the hardest, in my opinion, they're the hardest to adapt. And we were actually for when we do camp next year, hoping we can buy some of the plans for those recorders. What we're hoping we could do is with May We Help, they could organize a day where they make a bunch of them and have an
Oh, yeah.
instrument maker come in and guide the people who are doing that. Uh,
Okay.
that's just ideas that we've thrown around. So it depends on the device. So I feel like sometimes they've been very, very simple devices. For instance, when my daughter, who has one arm, played guitar, we just had it sitting in a bass stand facing her, and she strummed with her foot. And
Uh-huh.
when the engineers came up with, he just took the ring from a pop bottle and he
Uh-huh.
super glued a pick to it, and it slid right over her big toe. And that was her accommodation.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't a big deal. But then like stands that like my daughter uses that are similar to the ones the Petrie girls use. There was like 4 or 5 iterations of that before we
Uh,
got to that. So it just varies greatly depending. We've seen some very simple solutions. Trumpet stands that were pretty easy to make. It just varies so greatly.
Sure, sure. So I get that would be a good start though. That's, we don't have right now, we don't have anything readily available, which is
Yeah.
kind of why I've got the podcast going because I have teachers and I have I do two music ed graduate degrees at my university, and they're both teacher oriented, one for new certificates and one to deepen our knowledge, our certification after we're certified. But in either case, I teach, practicing
Yeah.
teachers, and they want to teach everybody. But, you see somebody come in, to your orchestra room with no
Yeah.
arms and you feel hopeless, how do you
Yeah.
do it? And like Jennifer said, sometimes we just need that first handle and we need that first belief that it's possible. And I think that's what, there are people in the world, and I didn't know this when I started, but there are people in the world tackling these issues. We just have to share what we
Yeah.
have, which I mean we're trying to do, but we have to find pathways to get it to the people who need
Yeah.
it.
I absolutely. Well, and I will say, like when Allie started cello, when my youngest started cello, we didn't have a stand. I was her stand for the first 3 months. I
Yes,
sat there on the floor while she practiced, and I held her cello, or my husband would come in, and we sat there and held the cello the whole time. And you know and that is something else that when I pulled the data from the maps, uh, parental involvement, this can't happen without it, and that's one of the reasons that we require a parent to come to camp with the child, because they have to know the process, they have to know the adaptation, they have to know how to follow up on it, because it's more than a teacher can do, really, realistically, and do well. And to know how to follow up on that. I wish that, as a longtime public school teacher, I want it to be that we can just do this. But right now, they really need
it's
that parental involvement.
I did some research a year or so ago with a couple of intellectually disabled adults who are musicians, and they're fine musicians once their instruments are set.
Yeah.
But neither one of them have the physical capability to set their own
Mhm.
instrument. And so, yeah, even sometimes just having somebody to sit and hold it, that's all
Yeah.
we need. And then we can be a
Yeah.
musician. But without that little bit, we
Yeah.
can't. So I think, and it's very, y'all are strings people, and I like the very Suzuki, we need our parents to be here. And that's true for able and
Yes.
disabled students, but I think even more so for a student who cannot, hold their own
Yeah,
cello.
yeah. And um and I think equipping teachers to know it is really just trial and error, you know? It is just
Yeah,
trial and error. And when I'm teaching, because I prepare teachers too. I'm a special education professor, and I tell them all the time, it is okay when people with disabilities can't do something. Like, they need to
yeah.
try it and find out. And just like with anybody learning, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Failure is part of the learning process. You know,
I always, yeah, I always tell people if I can't fail the way you failed, I didn't get the same
yeah,
experience
yeah,
you got.
exactly. It's all part of the process. And I think sometimes people are afraid when they're don't have a disability and they're working with a child who does. Well, we don't want them to
It feels,
fail.
yeah.
It's okay, and they can pick themselves up and try again.
Because they got a real
Yeah.
shot.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
But it does kind of seem sometimes to me even that we devote a lot of resources to a shot for somebody who might fail, because as I'm talking to you, I'm actually not playing my clarinet. I've gotten to a point where it's just, well, I got POTS last year, got diagnosed with POTS, and so I took a time off because I didn't want to pass
Mhm.
out. And now I've kind of gotten to the point where it's so frustrating and it's so much effort and so much work to play that I'm devoting my attention to this kind of work
Mhm.
instead. But I spent that money, and Peter made that clarinet for me. So I also have a little bit of guilt that we put so much time and effort and resources into an instrument that I'm not current. I'll use it
Yeah.
again, I know, but I'm not using it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I felt similarly when my oldest daughter, we first got connected with May We Help because she was going to play the trumpet and she is one-handed and she needed something to help her hold the trumpet. And so I contacted them and filled it out and they came and they built her this ingenious little stand that actually had she could manipulate the whole thing one-handed and it had
Mhm.
magnets built in so that the thing that held it for her could clip to the side and she could carry it and it was beautiful and it was truly an act of love as it was made, you know, like they made it look nice and everything. And yeah, trumpet was not her thing. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that trumpet was not her
Which
thing.
is also
And
good, yeah.
I felt so bad. I contacted Bill Sands, who was the man who made it, and I said, she's not playing anymore. I mean, it lasted like 6 months.
I'll patch for somebody
Well, and
else,
he said,
so.
you know, and he just said, yeah, there's not, you don't worry about it. The point was she should have had the opportunity. Like she had the
Yes,
opportunity to
yes.
try and it didn't work and somebody else will benefit from that work. And and I think that's really the attitude that we have to have. Like and again, if we're collecting what we're doing and sharing
Mhm.
that, somebody is always
This is where you come in.
going to benefit
Yes.
from it in the end.
All right, so I keep interrupting you to talk about tangential things. Tell us more about the maps. After we have decided where they're going to make contact,
So after we've
then what?
decided that, we, like I said, we work on the positioning. We work figure out do they need a stand, which you know, like I said, a person can be a stand-in for a stand. So like when we're in the week of camp, that's what happens. Like the parent might act as the stand or whatever until we can get that built. And then you also have to look at then are there other devices that are necessary, like something to support a bow grip or something to help. You know, with brass players, sometimes we get into things with mutes or, you know, things like that. So you want to consider if there are other devices that they need in regards to just the stand. Um, so there's that. And then once you've done that, then you can focus on the technique at that point. Like, how are they going to maximize the motions that they use to play the instrument? And really, when I look at the maps and when I pull up under the technique section uh, what the students need to work on, it's about 50% adaptive technique and 50% traditional. It was almost 50-50. It depends on the instrument and how the adaptation, but a lot of it was, you know, instructing them to do the same kinds of exercises and things like that that the other students would be doing typically. And then there might be, you know, something that's changed slightly, or a couple times there might have been like some kind of special technique exercise to train a limb to do something it didn't normally do. We really found that you have to really watch them when they're first playing because they think they can't do something, but then you see that they can do it. And if they can do it once, they can do it. You know, and that has been our philosophy from the beginning. If we see them do a motion, they can do a motion. And if you think about it, when you start teaching a child an instrument, and I always go back to piano because I'm a pianist, um, none of them have great muscle control over their hands because you develop
Right.
that muscle control. So it's the same thing when you're teaching adaptively. They don't have the full capacity of what they're capable to do with whatever they're playing with. So, so you do want to look at technique. And then after you look at technique, you also need to consider if you're going to need to do anything different with their curriculum, which again, we found for the most part, the only instrument that changes curriculum wise is piano because you end up having to adapt the music. Pretty much every other
Yeah.
instrument, they're pretty much not. There's a little bit sometimes with brass, but not really, and till later on. But piano, it needs an adapted curriculum, really. And so you take all of those things into consideration. So if you looked at a map for a piano student, that curriculum section may be longer than it would be for, say,
Uh-huh.
a trumpet or a guitar or whatever. Um, uh, oh, I would like to say too, I'm looking at a map as I'm doing this, but it's a piano one. When we look at the changes that we make to the position, we also look to see if we're going to make changes to the instrument itself. So sometimes we need to do that.
Sure.
So sometimes we're going to need to flip the instrument position wise or whatever. But for instance, when my daughter started cello, we flipped the strings on the cello because of her range of motion. And because the two
Uh-huh.
strings that you normally play on, she could not really reach that well. So we flipped them and she developed that. Now, what ended up happening was after a couple years, her range of motion started to increase because she was using that
Ability to
and we were able to flip them back, which blew my mind because she flipped them back in a summer. It was like, aren't you playing backwards? Like how, but she did. She
Mhm.
went and by the end of the summer, she could play. She was at the same level. I mean, she was amazing. Um, and we see that like guitars a lot of times, like drop tuning or changing the tuning on the
Yeah.
guitar to something different makes it easier to play in one with one hand, or less fingers or whatever it is you're doing. So sometimes you actually make changes to the instrument itself as well. So,
And that's where are different than everybody else because our instruments are specialized to
yes,
begin with.
exactly. And if they can play, in that way, then woodwinds are nice and easy because once they have that adapted instrument, it's just that it's so expensive. Yeah.
Solve the problems. Yeah, it's just the expense. And then, for those of us who are injured, there's a young guy, a child in California, I understand, who is starting because he was born with a
Mhm.
partial limb. And so he's starting on Peter's
Yeah.
one-handed instrument. Versus me, I had played the bilateral instrument for
Right.
30 years and having to go back and learn the one-handed instrument. But that's true for everybody who has, if you're whether you're start whatever you start with will be
Yes.
what you know. But those of us who are injured later, we have the addition of trying to come back and learn something new. But we're not learning to read. We still retain
Right.
our musical knowledge. We're just
Right,
learning the
which is something else we noticed with the maps. Like, if these children had already had music, any kind of like general music where they started learning how to read music, where they sang in a choir or something like that, that musical background really helped them as well. Just like it would in a typical situation. Yeah.
yes. So do you have a blank map, a simpler one that we could link to this episode so that teachers who may find themselves in positions might be able to kind of have at
Yes,
least guided
absolutely. I
thinking?
can I can send you that, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it would, yeah, I think that what you have is useful. I know your maps have gone through several iterations or becoming more complicated or more complete probably, but maybe just
Yeah,
a
I can
simple
I
one
can
for
send you a
beginners.
blank one. And it's
Huh?
pretty clear how to fill them in.
Thanks to Zildjian Cymbals for their support of the Center for Music Education at Georgia College. The Zildjian Company has been synonymous with setting the standard for the development and manufacture of high-performance musical instruments since 1623. As the world's leading maker of cymbals, drumsticks, and percussion mallets, Zildjian products are sold across the globe under the Zildjian, Vic Firth, and Balter brands, and are the standard to which all other cymbals, drumsticks, and mallets are measured.
Um, the last piece of the puzzle that we found is thinking ahead to future considerations. So, one of the things that seemed to work well when we were doing the camp, and one of the nice things with the body of maps that I had is about 60% of them were initial and 40% of them were advancing. So, we had some that were advancing, we could see is you don't have to problem solve everything at once. So, like even the example I was just giving with my daughter and the flip cello strings, she didn't have the range of motion at that point to do all four strings. We couldn't solve that then. but we did have down, okay, we're going to have to figure this out at some point. So it's going to mean something
Sure.
has to change, a position change with the cello or something so she can reach it. And then it ended up being, you know, yeah,
Her
her
body.
body just accommodated. And I think because she got bigger too, so that, the space she had to move maybe wasn't so big as when she was little. But yeah, and there are other things too, like you can see down the road, okay, we're going to need this. Like again, going back to the piano example, when I teach one-handed or adaptive piano, I start having the students jump around the keyboard much sooner than I do if I teach two-handed, because they have to develop that skill. So thinking ahead to what they're going to need to do to get to that next level, so that you can start
Sure, sure.
problem solving and thinking about it, and it's not like all of a sudden on you. So a lot of times just
Yeah.
noting, okay, we're going to have to problem solve blank at some point, is helpful too.
And do you find that once you kind of have a map, that this map, like if teaching one-handed guitar, do you see trends that the maps are similar, that we kind of, once we have a one-handed guitarist, we follow, and each one's going to be different, I know, but we follow a
It's
similar
hard to
path?
say because the biological diversity we got at camp didn't really allow for
Yes.
that. So
Sure.
we had, because a lot of times, like, we might have had somebody with one hand as opposed to one arm. So we had like one person with one arm, one person with one um one residual limb, and one full arm. Other students
Sure.
that had missing fingers. I think that as we get further with this, I think we're going to find that there are probably some universal things within each instrument and types of disabilities that could become standard.
Like
Yeah,
best
yeah.
practices. So like anything, differentiation is key because, even I'll just use it with OMI, with our American group of representatives at OMI. David and I have very similar injuries. We have very similar, both of us have
Hmm.
hemiplegia, and both of us are woodwinds that play one-handed instruments. But even with that, we're
Right.
not the same.
Yeah.
He does things that I can't do, and I do things that he can't
Yeah.
do. And
Well, and it's interesting. I've worked with several students, and recently I've worked with one with cerebral palsy, and so his left hand is awesome. He can play piano just fine, and but his right hand, is very tight. But he can use it for accent notes. He can use it, So thinking outside the box, it is kind of the same thing. People would look at that and think, well, he can only use his left hand. But if we're really, no, he can also use that right hand sometimes. He just has to have it staged right to be able to use it.
Well, and I always say my left hand is good for gross motor skills. I can't do fine motor skills, but I can
Yeah.
open the door, and if I can grab something, I can
Hmm.
hold it. Um, and I might not be able to let go of it, but I can hold
Yeah.
it. Because the big muscles contract and the little muscles
Right.
open. So once the big muscles develop first, so once I can hold, I can't always get it to
Yeah.
let go. But yeah, this is so exciting because, just the idea that within a, a time in front of us, we could reasonably have some best practices that we could share with the world. That's
It's
thrilling to
exciting.
me.
It's very exciting, and I think we're excited because we are going to be starting the camp back up this coming summer, and one of the things, I mean, I love the fact that the kids have a camp to go to. I don't think we realized when we held camp how significant it was to the children. Like, we were just kind of like, this is everyday life. This is what we do. We have children with limb differences. We weren't thinking, and so our experience has been so different, that it was so significant for these children, in part for them to be together with other children who are different, like they are, and to be in an environment where it was comfortable. Nobody was looking at them like this is unusual. Those pieces were really exciting, and seeing them play the instrument, find that instrument that they love and that just speaks their heart language, creatively, is always exciting. But also the
It
researcher
was
in me is like, the unique opportunity to have this group of
Yes.
people that you can't, you have to travel the country to pull them together, to have them
Yes.
all in one place. This is such a unique opportunity for us to be able to develop best practices.
Are you going to be back in
Yes, we're
Cincinnati
actually,
this summer?
it's not 100% yet, but it's very close. We are going to be at Northern Kentucky University where I'm a professor, which is in the Cincinnati area. It's in
Good.
Kentucky, but it's right across the river. And so, yeah, so
All
we
right.
will be,
When,
I'm sorry?
when in
July.
June,
Yeah, we
July?
have not set the exact week yet. We're in the final, just getting everything worked out with that, but it'll be in July. And our hope it will be to offer woodwinds and brass and guitar, piano, strings, and we've branched out also into the visual arts, and we'll be offering ceramics as well. We have an adaptive
Good.
ceramicist, and we're planning to open the applications for campers in January. Is our
Oh, good. If you'll share that with
That
me,
would be
I'll
great.
promote it
Yeah,
for
and
you.
we're actually going to start.
That would be opportunities for, yeah, people who don't, because around here, we don't have anything like that. So that would be great
Yeah,
opportunities for our
yeah. Well,
students.
I'll for sure connect you once we have that open, and we're starting once we get the date set in stone. Then we can create our promotional materials too, and we're going to start promoting it. So that we can make sure because we'll take up to we're hoping to get 4 campers per instrument or art, but we can take potentially up to
Mhm.
6. But it is very, because it's so individualized, we can't, it's never going to be a huge camp
Yeah.
at one time.
So parents need to travel
Yes,
with their
one parent
students.
with the student, and they'll stay on campus. We first couple of years we
Uh-huh.
did it. We didn't arrange housing, and then we started to, and they just build a sense of community, and it's good for the parents. It's good for everybody. It's more of a camp experience. It's funny because to the children, it's just music camp and it's fun, right? To the adults, we see everything that's going on, and oh, we've got an OT here, and we've got engineers, and they have a multidisciplinary team for each student. The kids don't see that. The kids just go to camp, have fun, and learn how to play an instrument.
So yeah, so you got on it, but for people who don't know, at the camp, the students are evaluated by occupational therapists,
So, well, they're
and
evaluated
they're
by a team. So, what we're pushing for this year is going to be a multidisciplinary team. So each teacher will be paired with an OT or a prosthetist. And then when the
Mhm.
student comes in, they'll take their lesson and they'll do some. The teacher is going to lead, but the OT or prosthetist is there to observe. And then on that team also will be a volunteer engineer from May We Help, and then the parent. And we've really tried to stay away from anything medical model and stay in so the
Yeah.
teacher is the lead because that's the idea. But
Mhm.
the OT or the prosthetist is there to provide support and guide, um, and how
Make
we're
it
going to
happen. Yeah.
adapt. So that's the model that we're looking at. And so then there would be one OT or prosthetist that's tied to that teacher, and they work together. But it'll be a different engineer cycling in with each team.
Okay. So yeah. So then the OT or prosthetist talks to the engineer about what we need, and they
Yes,
figure out
that
how to
that's going
build
to be
it.
the idea. Coordinating all this has been really hard.
Outstanding.
Engineers are very different
I bet
than
that's huge.
musicians in their
Yes.
personalities. They are so lovely. They want to fix it right away. They want to get in and they want to
Yes.
provide a solution. And we have to be really careful that they don't jump in too soon. And so navigating that, we need to know what we need, and then bring that
Sure. Yeah.
third voice in. Um, so it's all been a process. But before we've had OTs involved on a volunteer basis, and it's been hard to figure out how to incorporate them. But this year we're thinking that that's their role.
And best. Yeah. Outstanding.
The Bell/McRoy Music Collective empowers music educators and student leaders through purposeful teaching, artistic excellence, and transformative leadership. Grounded in fundamentals, driven by equity, and inspired by community, we cultivate musical independence and champion the responsible stewardship of each individual's musical gifts. Through coaching, consulting, and collaboration, we help music programs thrive. One note, one leader, one classroom at a time. You can take advantage of our Back to School special offer for a one-on-one coaching call with Dr. Bell McRoy by visiting bellmcroymusiccollective.com.
Between the camp and your maps, you are doing amazing work that's going to allow, yeah, and you're already and have already, I think you got the feedback from your camp, have already changed so many lives from people who, were used to, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. You wait over here and everybody else is going to do this, but you'll get hurt or you can't do it. To be somewhere where the whole point is that you can do it. That's, very affirming, and then to allow them to take with them something so that when they leave, they can actually continue to do
Yeah,
what they've been
that's
doing.
the hope. Yeah.
And and I think even, as an OT or a prosthetist or an engineer, just the opportunity to change lives in that way is kind of why you get into those
Yes,
fields.
yeah, yeah. I think, um, yeah, I think you're right. It's exciting. We're really working with May We Help. They really want to go from, common everyday things to giving opportunities to people with disabilities to really excel at what they want to excel at. And that's a big piece of our relationship with them is that this is something where we not only can provide access, but we can help them grow in their skills and give them a platform. And that's our goal. With the Adaptive Arts and Music Project in general, our little tagline is from access to skill. And that's
Stand.
what we're aiming
So
for.
as my brain is going towards best practices, I'm also thinking that maybe, some of these May We Help and some of the engineers and these kinds of things, we could put together some schematics for various things that we find useful in or in many situations, so that we're not reinventing the wheel whenever somebody else does
Oh
the
yeah,
same thing. And you have,
that's one of our goals this time, is what we would like to do with our website, which is basically got nothing on it at this point,
that's
but we'll eventually have more on it, is to have a repository of open source things like that. Probably also would be stored on May We Help's website as well. But yeah, so then somebody else can pick it up and they may have to tweak it
yes, of course.
to meet the need of that student. But it's at least, yeah, we're not always reinventing the wheel. That whole bespoke ad hoc, what do I do right in this moment? But we have something we can easily go to
And I think that
and
that's
use.
that's going to be a game changer because, like I said, so many teachers want to teach everybody, but they
Yeah,
they they have nothing. They don't have strategies, they don't have materials, they don't have funding, they don't have a helper, they have nothing to help them with this child who requires these four extra steps that none of the other require.
yes,
So, if we had these kind of resources, kind of readily available that you're building, then at least I have a starting point and I could take,
yeah,
these plans to one of my parents in the school somewhere will know what to do with them. And then, maybe the PTA might chip, that gives us a handle. And that's what I'm seeing,
mhm,
Omi in general, and then y'all and, Peter trying to make his recorder and his plans open access and, all of this stuff. We're really kind of moving toward an idea of having some as universal as we can get for how specific we are. Like you said,
yeah,
we might not be able to take this and just print it and go. We're going to have to say, okay, we're going to have to make this right or left-handed, or we're going to have to, we're going to have to take out the third finger or whatever it is that we need to do. But it
yeah,
gives us a place
yeah.
to start.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, and this is just me brainstorming, and now it's being recorded. Um,
For
but
both.
two, if we can get those, if we can get the plans from Peter to build the recorders and we want to build, we have enough, like perhaps may we help could have that build day and you or David could come into town and oversee and consult with that.
I would be happy to be there. I'm not sure that I could oversee or consult. I don't think that's within my qualifications. I could try, but
Mm.
yeah, and I think getting the plans from Peter would just be a simple email because
Yeah, I think David's been in contact with
yeah,
him.
he's
So
been very, he's been very much, I'm getting to an age where I can't, I don't want to take all of this with me. He really, really wants to share it, and he wants to share it with people who are going to be able to use it. And
yeah,
so I think, yeah, I think that would be the easy part.
The Center for Music Education at Georgia College is excited to offer a classroom instrument repair certificate in conjunction with the Band Instrument Repair Academy in June 2026 at the historic Georgia College and State University campus in Milledgeville, Georgia. Contact tina.holmes-davis at gcsu.edu for the registration link. Space is limited. Register today.
yeah,
All right. Well, I think that's our time. Thank you so much for your ideas
yeah,
and for your work. When I was injured, I felt like I was the only musician in the whole world that had gone through what I was going through. And getting hooked up with OMI kind of got my instrument, but it also opened me up to Americans, who are already doing this work. Of course, the Europeans, and we have people around the world. But it's so interesting to me that we already have these things going on, and I'm so grateful
yeah.
for people who are doing this work, so that we will have these opportunities.
Yeah, well, it's an exciting field.
It
I
is.
feel like it's an exciting opportunity, and I've always just been very thankful to be able to be an ally to the disability community, and having children with disabilities um, really opened me up to that possibility, and so I'm very thankful for that because it's exciting work.
It is, and it's a very, it's just this is somebody's life. This is the difference between them being able to make a decision that we take for granted or not. And yeah, I was
Yeah,
thinking about that the other day. I was writing when I did my dissertation, I was my area of specialty was self-regulated musical learning. But after my stroke, I became a researcher into disability music making, and that's just such a great fit for me. And I think it's so funny that the final piece in my research world was a stroke. I mean, because
yeah.
don't ever sit around going, okay, what I need to do now is have a stroke.
Have a stroke. Yeah, no, probably wouldn't choose that.
No,
No.
I wouldn't. But thank you so much, and thank you. If I can help this summer in any way, let me know. I'll be happy to ride out there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, it was good talking to you.
You too. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.
This podcast was created and recorded by Dr. Tina Holmes Davis. It was edited and produced by Landon Frazier. Music composed and performed by Brent MacDonald. More Able Than Dis is an initiative of the Centre for Music Education at Georgia College.